Karen had my SUV towed not knowing. It was a DEA surveillance sting vehicle. You ever have one of those days where every single thing feels like it's on the verge of collapse, and then someone pushes it over the edge? That was the day Karen had my SUV towed. Not just any SUV, mind you, a government-issued, tech-packed, low-profile surveillance vehicle assigned to a highly active DEA narcotics investigation that had taken me 3 months to set up. And she had it towed because, and I quote, it looked sketchy and probably belonged to some cartel thug squatting in the neighborhood. She didn't even live on that street. Yeah, buckle up. I've worked undercover narcotics for 11 years. DEA, Badge 178 Field Division, San Diego. I've seen more than my share of meth labs and sheds, cartel safe houses and tract homes. And yes, Karens who think the world spins on their HOA's interpretation of curb appeal. My team and I had been quietly observing a mid-level fentanyl ring that had taken root in one of those upper-middle-class developments just off Del Sol Parkway cookie-cutter houses. Joggers at dawn, kids with scooters and side ponytails. Perfect camouflage for people moving millions in poison. The operation was called Project Sapphire Dust. We had intel suggesting shipments were being funneled through one house at the end of Loma Verde Court, a cul-de-sac where people pretend to wave at each other while calling code compliance behind your back. We'd been running live vehicle surveillance, thermal imaging, and motion triggers from an unmarked SUV. Mine. I'd swapped plates, covered the factory tag with dust, and parked it legally. No fire hydrants, no blocking driveways. Every 2 hours I rotated position down the block. But Karen, bless her manicured pettiness, had apparently spotted my non-standard vehicle 3 days in a row, and she did something about it. It happened while I was on foot nearby, dressed in plain jeans and a hoodie, blending in while monitoring comings and goings at the suspect house. I ducked behind a trimmed ficus hedge when I noticed Karen striding toward my SUV with that signature suburban fury arms pumping, lips pursed, holding a clipboard and a smartphone. I recognized her from a week prior when she confronted a landscaper for parking his truck too loud. No, really. She pointed at my SUV, talked to herself for dramatic effect, and made a call. I pressed my earpiece. Base, this is Alpha 3. We may have an interference event. Local civilian making contact with Unit 7. Dispatch crackled copy. Sit tight. Observation remains priority. So I stayed hidden. That was my first mistake. 2 hours later, I returned to where my vehicle had been, and all that remained was the square of dirt where the tires had kissed the curb. My heart dropped. I radioed command and called local tow services, pretending to be just another panicked citizen whose car had vanished. Took about 15 minutes before I got a hit from Lockjaw Towing, some third-tier contractor who works with self-appointed neighborhood compliance groups. They said a woman named Karen Wellington had signed the request as neighborhood liaison and safety enforcement chair. I didn't recognize the group. That's when the phrase fake HOA started ringing in my head like a bad omen. She wasn't part of the actual HOA. She was running her own. I didn't blow my cover right away. I drove my personal car to Lockjaw's impound lot, showed them a standard field authorization letter, and demanded immediate access. The technician, some young guy with a vape pen hanging from his hoodie string, pointed nervously toward a locked compound. She said it was suspicious, that it had, wires sticking out. I laughed. The wires were thermal triggers and encrypted mesh antennas, government property, loaded with enough gear to make a CIA techie weep. I unlocked the vehicle. The rear cameras had been forcibly disabled. The hard drive inside had been yanked loose. I felt something cold crawl up my neck. That night, I filed a full incident report and sent it to my regional director. Within 12 hours, a federal complaint was issued for interference in an active investigation. But the damage was already done. Our suspects had moved operations the moment they noticed the vehicle was missing, probably assuming law enforcement had made a move. 3 months of surveillance, gone. And yet, the more I dug, the more I realized this wasn't a one-off power trip. Karen Wellington had built a shadow HOA. She printed forms, handed out fines, called in violations to realtors, and even posted emergency orders on people's doors, all while having no legal standing to do any of it. And people complied because she wore a laminated badge that said Neighborhood Enforcement Authority in Comic Sans. I'd seen drug cartels with less organizational reach. 2 days later, I requested authorization to begin a side investigation into Karen's operations. At first, my supervisor was hesitant. "We're DEA, not code enforcement," he said, but I pushed back. "She didn't just tow a car, she obstructed a federal sting, and she's doing this to dozens of families." He gave me a week, and that's all I needed. I posed as a new homeowner, single mother, moving into the development with 2 kids and a fake backstory. Within 24 hours of pulling into the neighborhood, I got a folded compliance slip on my front porch. "Your vehicle is not in accordance with Neighborhood Safety Guidelines, Section 3A. Please remove within 6 hours to avoid penalty." I didn't move it. Karen showed up in person. She looked exactly like every meme you've ever seen. Platinum hair sprayed to aerodynamic perfection, a pastel cardigan worn like armor, sunglasses indoors. She didn't knock. She tapped her clipboard against my glass door with the righteousness of someone who'd watched too many courtroom dramas. "I'm here on behalf of the Neighborhood Safety Authority," she said. "You violated Parking Ordinance 3A. I smiled. Which governing body passed that she blinked? "Excuse me." I took a slow step forward. "You said ordinance. Is there a municipal vote on record, or did you just print that at Staples?" Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "You're clearly new here. Let me explain how things work." "Oh, sweetheart." Karen's voice was sharp enough to cut drywall. "You have no idea what kind of community you've moved into," she said, arms crossed, clipboard clutched to her chest like a legal shield. "I'm just trying to keep things safe." I tilted my head. "By towing strangers' cars and threatening fines you have no authority to issue." She scoffed. "I am the authority. The board elected me." "There is no board," I interrupted. Pause. Silence. A flicker of panic crossed her eyes just for a second. "Look," she snapped, adjusting her fake badge. "If you want to fit in here, you'll need to follow the rules." That sounds more like a threat than a welcome. I don't care what it sounds like. I care about property values. I let her spin her illusion for a minute longer. Then I stepped forward, slowly, and said something that made her flinch. "I know you towed an SUV off Loma Verde Court 3 days ago. Do you know what was in that vehicle?" Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. "You're lucky I'm not here to arrest you." She backed up. I was told it was suspicious. I was protecting residents by tampering with an active federal investigation." Now her hands were trembling. "I need you to leave," she hissed. "Right now." Before I call, I held up my real badge. DA, full authority. Her mouth froze in mid-sentence. "I am who you'd call." And just like that, her fantasy fractured. Over the next 5 days, I dug into her self-made empire. The real HOA had been dissolved 5 years ago due to internal fraud and disbanded formally by city vote. But Karen, who'd moved in only 2 years ago, discovered that no one had legally contested the use of the old bylaws. So she printed them out, rebranded them, and formed the Safety and Beautification Council of Loma Verde. A fancy name for a one-woman crusade. She forged meeting minutes, created digital newsletters, hosted Zoom board meetings with only herself, and mailed out invoices to residents. Worse, she partnered with a shady towing contractor, Lockjaw Towing, and split the profits from unauthorized impounds. But here's where it turned ugly. She wasn't just issuing fake fines. She was targeting specific homeowners. Latino family with a camper in their driveway. Towed. Black couple holding a cookout on a Sunday afternoon. Reported for noncompliance. Vietnam veteran with a faded flag on the porch, eyesore. She called these things quality control. I called it a civil rights nightmare. I compiled a digital folder labeled the Fake HOA Files and began quietly interviewing affected neighbors. Most were terrified of her. Some had already paid hundreds in fake citations thinking she was legitimate. A few were ready to sue but didn't know where to start. But one woman, Janelle Harper, A local preschool teacher whose husband had just deployed overseas gave me what I needed, most receipts. Literally, Karen had fined her $250 for untrimmed hedges and demanded cash, which she dropped off into a fake mailbox labeled HOA payment drop box. Janelle had screenshots, Venmo history, and even a voicemail of Karen saying, "We don't need city involvement. We settle things internally here." Bingo. Around that time, something strange happened. My fake cover identity, Maya Roberts, received a printed warning on her door that looked more official than Karen's usual printouts. This one had a real city seal, but it was off. I checked the barcode, it led to nowhere. The listed ordinance number didn't exist in any city record. She had upgraded her fraud, not just petty enforcement. Now she was faking city documents. That crossed into federal crime. So I called in backup. 2 agents from Internal Affairs joined the investigation, working from the inside. Agent Dalton posed as a utilities contractor. Agent Mireles took over surveillance from the adjacent cul-de-sac. My job was to keep the pressure low and wait, but Karen made that impossible. She called in another tow. This time it wasn't a car. It was a trailer belonging to a retired fire chief. She claimed it violated community lines. The fire chief's daughter filmed the confrontation and it went viral. Over 3 million views in 2 days. Comments exploded. Local news picked it up. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know, who is this woman issuing HOA fines in a neighborhood without an HOA? It unraveled faster than I imagined. Karen doubled down. She printed flyers accusing new residents of weaponizing cancel culture. She claimed to be under attack for preserving order. She tried to host an emergency HOA rally at the park. Only 4 people showed up. All of them were real estate flippers she'd scammed into thinking she had sway over property values. Meanwhile, I turned in my final dossier. It was enough to trigger federal charges: impersonation of a municipal officer, mail fraud, obstruction of justice, illegal towing of federal property, and racketeering. And then it happened. We didn't knock on her door. We waited until she held her next fake HOA board meeting on her porch with a camera crew from Channel 7 News filming her restoring order. That's when I walked up, badge visible, followed by 2 federal agents and a uniformed officer from San Diego PD. The footage was live. The headline changed in real time: local woman find hundreds in fake HOA scam, arrested during on-camera interview. She froze mid-sentence. "Karen Wellington," I said calmly, "you are under arrest for obstruction of federal operations, fraud, and impersonating city officials." She screamed, not in fear, in denial. "You can't do this. I'm trying to help. This is my community." But the handcuffs clicked anyway. You'd think getting arrested on live TV would be the end of it. But with people like Karen Wellington, the fall doesn't happen all at once. It crumbles in layers, slow, loud, and painful. That night, after we took her into custody, she spent 4 hours in federal holding, demanding to speak to someone higher up. When they brought her in for processing, she refused fingerprinting, citing a non-existent statute about civil sovereignty. The whole time, she kept calling herself a community leader, like that was a job title. But what hit her hardest wasn't the handcuffs, it was the silence that followed. No supporters, no neighbors storming the station. Not a single person came to bail her out. Back in the neighborhood, something strange happened. It wasn't celebration, it wasn't relief, it was grief. People had been living under her fake rules so long, they didn't even know how to function without fear. One man told me he hadn't opened his garage door on weekends in 6 months because she'd warned him he'd trigger property decline. A young couple said they had been fined for using a playset in their own backyard too loudly. It wasn't just a scam, it was emotional control, a kind of suburban tyranny wrapped in pastel cardigans and clipboards. And when that spell broke, it didn't feel like justice. It felt like waking up after years of gaslighting. That week, the story exploded nationally. CNN, Fox, Reddit, TikTok edits of her arrest set to Taylor Swift. She became a meme and a cautionary tale in one. But I wasn't finished. Because while the community was beginning to breathe again, I was still holding on to one question that didn't sit right. Why did Karen target that SUV out of all the vehicles on the street? Why mine? She claimed it looked sketchy, but I dug deeper into her past and found something that blew the entire case wide open. A decade earlier, Karen had lived in Arizona under a different last name, Karen Roth. She had once been a paralegal for a real estate firm until she was fired for falsifying code violations to push out lower-income homeowners. She'd even faced charges, but the case was dropped due to a clerical error. I found archived documents, old court dockets, a restraining order from a former coworker. This wasn't her first time playing judge and jury in a gated community. She didn't tow my car by accident. She recognized the pattern unmarked plates, dusty bumper, tinted surveillance gear. She'd seen it before. Karen Wellington wasn't just a suburban busybody. She was a grifter in pearls. The final nail came 2 weeks later, when she tried to sue me. That's right. She filed a complaint alleging emotional distress and unlawful impersonation, saying I had infiltrated her lawful organization and disrupted community cohesion. The judge threw it out in under 10 minutes. But it gave the prosecutors what they needed: proof that she still believed her own fantasy and that she had no remorse. In court, she wore a lavender suit and held her fake badge as if it meant something. When the charges were read: obstruction of federal law enforcement, impersonation of a government official, wire fraud, mail fraud, and racketeering, she muttered under her breath, "This is all a mistake. I was protecting them." The courtroom fell silent. Then Janelle stood up. "You remember her? The preschool teacher? The one Karen had extorted." She walked up to the podium and read a victim statement that made even the bailiff tear up. "I stopped letting my daughter ride her bike. My husband deployed, and I felt afraid to live in my own home because a woman with no authority said she would watch us. She fined us for leaving a porch light on. She stalked us like a predator in pastel. This wasn't about safety. This was about control." And then she looked Karen in the eye and said, "You weren't keeping the neighborhood safe. You were trying to own it." Karen was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, with probation for 2 more and a permanent ban on holding any official or representative position in housing or real estate. Over 37 families filed for restitution. A civil case is still pending. But here's the twist no one saw coming. Right before sentencing, Karen submitted a sealed letter to the court. When it was unsealed, it contained a list of names people she had copied her model from. Apparently, there were dozens of fake HOAs operating across the country using the same playbook: no authority, but plenty of intimidation. Neighborhood rackets disguised as beautification committees, towing scams, citation extortion, property bullying. Karen wasn't the beginning. She was a franchise. We forwarded the list to the Department of Justice. It sparked a nationwide investigation into unregulated HOAs and led to a policy shift: new requirements on transparency, resident voting, and digital registration for all HOA-like entities. And me, I got promoted to a new role: Director of Community Justice Operations, a task force designed to investigate civil abuse on a federal level. Sometimes justice starts in the unlikeliest places, like a woman towing the wrong SUV. Karen, now in a drab jumpsuit, is seen working in a low-security garden program. The fake badge she once flaunted is now just a faded memory, taped inside a cardboard folder in an evidence box. Cut to the same cul-de-sac, children laughing, porch lights on. A real, legitimate neighborhood committee of residents now holds community BBQs open to all, free from fear. One neighbor walks past the old mailbox where Karen once collected fines. It's now painted bright blue and repurposed as a free book library. A handwritten sign dangles from the side. Real leaders don't need clipboards. Some still say she meant well. Others call her a tyrant. But I'll say this: she taught us what justice isn't and made us fight harder for what it should be. Call to action. What do you think? Was Karen a misguided protector or a power-hungry manipulator? Have you ever encountered a fake authority trying to control your life? Drop your thoughts below. Let's talk about real justice, community power, and where the line should be drawn.